I was standing outside the courtroom when the man holding my drill case said loudly, "She told me her husband died." The hallway went completely silent. People stopped mid-conversation and turned to stare at us. My ex-wife's eyes widened for just a second before they narrowed into angry slits. My pulse spiked so hard I could taste metal on my tongue. The air felt thick and heavy, like right before a thunderstorm breaks open. I turned slowly toward her, watching every muscle in her face, waiting for the lie to crack open and spill out the truth she'd been hiding. She opened her mouth, probably to deny everything or create another elaborate story to cover her tracks. But before she could speak, the heavy courtroom door swung open with a loud creak. The judge stepped out, scanning the crowded hallway with tired eyes that had probably seen 1,000 cases just like ours. "Mitchell versus Mitchell," he called out in a bored voice that echoed off the marble walls. "We're ready for you now." My ex-wife shot me a look that could have melted steel, then turned and walked toward the courtroom door with her head held high like she owned the entire building and everyone in it. Inside the courtroom, I clutched my folder of evidence so tightly my knuckles went white and started to ache. The empty space where my tools should have been felt like a hole in my chest that wouldn't stop bleeding. My name is Laurel Mitchell, and those tools weren't just equipment to me. They were my entire livelihood, my career, everything I'd worked toward for the past 15 years. Every wrench, every drill, every saw represented hours of saving money and building a reputation in this community. The judge settled into his high-backed chair and shuffled through papers on his desk with the casual efficiency of someone who'd done this routine 1,000,000 times before. He looked up at me over his reading glasses, his expression neutral and unreadable. "Mr. Mitchell, are you prepared to present your case today?" My ex-wife smirked from her table across the aisle. That same superior smile she'd been wearing for weeks, like she'd already won the lottery and this was just a formality before she collected her prize. The lawyer next to her whispered something in her ear and she nodded, looking even more confident. My throat felt dry and tight like sandpaper. I forced myself to swallow the anger that was bubbling up inside me like lava. "Your Honor," I said, my voice steadier than I actually felt, "I have something very important you need to hear. Let me take you back 6 weeks, to the exact day everything fell apart and my world turned upside down. I remember walking into my workshop that Tuesday morning with a coffee in one hand and my phone in the other, checking emails from clients about upcoming job. Was excited to start. The door was already unlocked when I reached it, which should have been my first warning sign that something was wrong. I pushed it open and stepped inside, then froze completely in my tracks. Half my shelves were empty. The spaces where my toolboxes usually sat showed nothing but dust and bare wood. My saws were gone. My drills, my sanders, my entire collection of power tools I'd spent years carefully accumulating piece by piece, all vanished like they'd never existed. My heart started pounding hard against my ribs as I spun around in a circle, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. My brain couldn't process it. This had to be some kind of mistake. That's when I noticed my ex-wife standing in the doorway behind me, blocking the exit. She was sipping an iced coffee through a straw, watching me with this calm expression on her face, like she hadn't just set my entire world on fire and watched it burn. "What did you do?" I managed to ask, my voice barely working properly. She shrugged casually. "You don't need them anymore, Laurel." I stared at her, trying to process those cold words. "You don't need them anymore." Like my career was just something she could decide to end on a random Tuesday morning without any discussion or warning. "Where are they?" I demanded, walking toward her with my hands shaking. My whole body was trembling with anger and complete disbelief. "What did you do with my tools? Where's my equipment?" She took another long sip of her coffee, deliberately making me wait for an answer. The sound of the straw-sucking liquid was the only noise in the silent workshop. "I accidentally donated everything to charity," she finally said, using air quotes around the word accidentally with her free hand. "It was cluttering up the garage, and I needed the space for my things. You understand?" My stomach dropped like I'd missed a step going downstairs in the dark. These weren't trinkets or old clothes she'd given away without thinking. This was professional equipment worth thousands of dollars. This was how I paid our bills, how I kept food on the table, how I kept the lights on in this house we were now fighting over in court. You donated my business? I couldn't keep the shock and horror out of my voice. But as I looked around the empty workshop more carefully, I noticed something strange. The shelves had dust-free outlines where things had been sitting very recently. And donated items get picked up by trucks. They don't leave perfect rectangular shadows behind like ghosts. You didn't donate anything, I said, my voice getting harder and more accusatory. You sold it, didn't you? Where's my equipment? What did you really do with everything? Her face stayed perfectly calm and composed, but I saw it clear as day. That tiny twitch at the corner of her mouth that she always got when she was lying to me. I'd learned to recognize that tell over 12 long years of marriage through countless small lies and big ones. I just told you what happened, she said, her voice getting annoyed and defensive. Everything went to charity. I have the receipt somewhere around here if you really need to see it for proof. She was lying through her teeth. I knew she was lying. But what could I do right then and there? Accuse her without solid proof? That would just make me look desperate and paranoid in front of anyone who mattered. Before I could respond or press her further, my phone buzzed insistently in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw a text message from one of my regular clients, a contractor named William Briggs I'd worked with for 5 solid years. Hey Laurel, I'm canceling the bathroom renovation job we discussed. Heard you're not in business anymore. Sorry, man. Good luck with everything. My hand clenched around the phone so hard I thought the screen might crack. Not in business anymore. She'd been actively telling people around town that I was done, finished, completely out of work and never coming back. I tried desperately to keep working despite everything. I couldn't just give up and let her win without even fighting back. I borrowed tools from friends and former colleagues, showing up to jobs with mismatched equipment that barely functioned properly and kept breaking down. Everything went wrong from the very start. The cheap drill I borrowed from my neighbor kept overheating and dying right in the middle of important projects. The saw blade was dull and kept binding in the wood, making dangerous situations. Simple jobs that should have taken me 2 hours at most stretched into entire exhausting days. Clients started complaining about delays and quality issues. My reputation, built so carefully over 15 long years of hard work and dedication, was crumbling like a sandcastle at high tide. Work dried up faster than I could have possibly imagined. People in the construction business talked to each other constantly, and word spread quickly through the community that Laurel Mitchell's quality had dropped significantly. I started losing contracts to competitors who swooped in like vultures. My income dropped from comfortable and stable to barely surviving in the span of just 3 miserable weeks. One evening, I came home exhausted and frustrated from another failed job where nothing had gone right. I heard my ex-wife on the phone in the kitchen, her voice carrying clearly into the hallway where I stood frozen. He's basically done, she was saying to someone, probably her expensive lawyer. He won't fight back. He never does. He's too weak. That's when I started to see her real plan taking shape. She pushed hard for a fast divorce settlement, wanting everything signed and finalized within weeks instead of months. During our mandatory mediation session, she kept bringing up how I was unstable now that my business income had disappeared. Her lawyer made pointed comments about my inability to maintain steady employment. They painted me as unreliable and financially irresponsible. She wanted the house. She wanted our savings account. She wanted the car that was paid off. She basically wanted everything we'd built together, claiming she deserved it because she was the stable one now. I sat through those meetings feeling like I was drowning in quicksand. Every time I tried to defend myself, she had another story ready about my supposed instability or recklessness with money. Her lawyer took notes and nodded sympathetically at her fictional narrative. Then one night, I was taking out the trash when I noticed something in the bin. A crumpled receipt from Casey's Pawn and Resale, dated 3 days after my tools disappeared. My hands started shaking as I smoothed it out. The receipt listed multiple power tools. The descriptions matched my equipment exactly. Milwaukee drill set, DeWalt circular saw, Makita sander, all sold for a fraction of their actual value. And there at the bottom was a signature. Her signature, clear as day. My throat burned with anger so intense I thought I might actually be sick. She hadn't donated anything to charity. She'd sold my livelihood for quick cash at a pawn shop, probably getting maybe 20% of what those tools were actually worth. My hands shook as I held that receipt. This was proof. Real, tangible proof of what she'd done. But before I could take a photo or make a copy, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Her footsteps heading toward the kitchen where the trash bins were kept. I quickly shoved the receipt in my pocket and grabbed a bag of trash to make it look like I was just doing normal chores. She appeared in the doorway, watching me with suspicious eyes. "What are you doing out here?" she asked. "Just taking out the garbage," I said, keeping my voice casual. I made a decision right then. I wasn't going to confront her. Not yet. Confronting her would just give her time to create another lie or hide more evidence. Instead, I would play defeated. Let her think she'd won. Let her believe I was too broken to fight back. So that's exactly what I did. For the next 2 weeks, I walked around the house with my shoulders slumped. I stopped arguing during mediation sessions. I barely spoke during our few interactions at home. She started strutting around like she'd already won the lottery. Her confidence grew every day as I appeared to shrink. She made plans with friends for after the divorce, talking loudly on the phone about the fresh start she was going to have. She even started redecorating the house with things she'd bought, assuming it would be all hers soon. Then one afternoon, I got a text message from her lawyer's office. She'd scheduled our court date without even telling me. The hearing was set for 3 weeks away. My anger flared again, but I kept it hidden. Perfect. That gave me time. I started rebuilding my case in secret. Every night after she went to bed, I stayed up gathering evidence. I found old receipts from when I'd purchased my tools, showing the original prices and serial numbers. I dug through my phone and computer for photos of my workshop from over the years, showing all the equipment in my possession. I downloaded text messages from clients, proving I had active contracts and ongoing work before my tools disappeared. I organized everything methodically, creating a timeline that showed exactly how and when my business collapsed after she emptied my workshop. I made copies of everything and stored them in 3 different places: my friend's house, a safety deposit box at the bank, and a cloud storage account she didn't know existed. I wasn't taking any chances. Then I looked at that pawn shop receipt again, really studying it this time. At the bottom, below her signature, was a number scribbled in pen. It looked like a phone number. My heart started beating faster. I sat in my car in a grocery store parking lot and dialed the number. My hands were sweating. The phone rang 3 times before a man answered. "Hello?" "Hi," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm calling about some tools that were sold to Casey's Pawn about 6 weeks ago. Milwaukee drills, DeWalt saw, Makita sander." There was a long silence on the other end. "Yeah," the man finally said. "I bought those good quality stuff. Why?" I took a deep breath. "Those were my tools. The woman who sold them to you was my wife. Well, ex-wife now." Another silence, longer this time. "She told me her husband passed away," the man said slowly. "Said she was cleaning out his workshop and couldn't bear to keep his things around." My blood ran cold. She'd told him I was dead, actually dead. "I'm very much alive," I said, "and those tools were stolen from me." The man swore quietly. "I've got paperwork," he said after a moment. "Everything from the purchase. Texts with her too. She's been messaging me about other items." We met 2 days later at a small cafe downtown. The man's name was Felix Cordero, and he looked as angry as I felt. He was maybe 50 years old, with gray hair and carpenter's hands. He laid out everything on the table between us. Receipts from the pawn shop showing what he'd paid. Screenshots of text messages between him and my ex-wife where she described me as her late husband and talked about selling more of my estate. Photos he'd taken of the tools when he bought them, showing the serial numbers clearly. "I bought these in good faith," Felix said, his jaw tight. "I paid fair money for what I thought was a widow selling her husband's things. I would never have touched them if I'd known the truth." He pushed the photos toward me. "I'm angry she lied to me, used me as part of whatever scheme she's running." I looked at all the evidence spread across the table. This was even better than I'd hoped. "Would you be willing to testify in court?" I asked. Felix didn't hesitate. "Absolutely." Back at home, my ex-wife acted like nothing had happened. She was already imagining what she'd say in court, I could tell. She spent hours on the phone with her lawyer, going over her testimony. I could hear her from the next room, rehearsing her lies about how unreliable I was, how I'd let the business fail through my own incompetence. She bought a new outfit for court, expensive and professional looking, paid for with money from our joint account that she'd been slowly draining. One evening, she actually said it out loud. We were in the kitchen, moving around each other like strangers. She was making herself dinner and acting like I didn't exist. Then she looked up at me with that smirk I'd grown to hate. "You'll look like a fool tomorrow," she said, referring to some mediation session I'd supposedly agreed to attend. "Your whole case is going to fall apart, and everyone will see you for what you really are, a failure." I just nodded and left the room. Let her think that. Let her walk into court completely confident and unprepared. The morning of the hearing arrived cold and gray. I got to the courthouse an hour early, my stomach tight with nerves. My hands were trembling slightly as I carried my thick folder of evidence through the metal detectors. I'd barely slept the night before, running through everything in my mind over and over. What if something went wrong? What if the judge didn't believe me? What if her lies were more convincing than my truth? I found a bench in the hallway outside our assigned courtroom and sat down heavily. Other people moved past me, lawyers in expensive suits and families dealing with their own legal battles. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. My mouth felt dry as sand. Then I saw him, Felix Cordero, walking down the hallway carrying my old drill case, the red Milwaukee one I'd bought 5 years ago for a major renovation project. He spotted me and nodded, his face serious and determined. He sat down on the bench next to me. "Ready?" he asked quietly. "As I'll ever be," I replied. That's when my ex-wife appeared at the end of the hallway. She walked toward the courtroom with her lawyer, wearing that new outfit and carrying herself like she owned the building. Then she saw Felix sitting next to me with the drill case. Her steps faltered for just a second. Felix stood up, making sure she could see him clearly. "Excuse me," he said loudly enough for everyone in the hallway to hear. "Are you the woman who sold me these tools?" She stopped walking. Her face went pale. "You told me your husband died," Felix continued, his voice getting harder. "You looked me right in the eye and said he passed away. But here he is, very much alive, and you stole his equipment." People in the hallway stopped and turned to watch. Her lawyer touched her arm, probably telling her not to respond. But the damage was done. Everyone heard it. The lie was out in the open. Her face went from pale to bright red. She opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again without making a sound. "That's not what happened," she finally managed to say, but her voice cracked. The bailiff appeared at the courtroom door. "Mitchell versus Mitchell," he called out. "We're ready for you now." Inside the courtroom, the judge reviewed the initial filings while we all took our seats. My ex-wife kept glancing at Felix, who sat in the gallery behind me. Her confidence from this morning had evaporated. She whispered urgently to her lawyer, who looked increasingly uncomfortable. The judge looked up from his papers. "Mrs. Mitchell, you're claiming that marital assets should be divided equally, with the house going to you due to Mr. Howe Mitchell's unstable employment situation. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," she said, her voice stronger now. She was trying to recover her composure. "My husband let his business fail through neglect. The tools he claims I sold were basically junk that he never used anymore. I got rid of clutter." The judge raised an eyebrow and looked at me. "Mr. Mitchell, you're contesting this characterization?" "Yes, Your Honor," I said. "Those tools were professional equipment that I used daily. They were stolen and sold without my knowledge or consent." The judge made a note. "Can anyone corroborate your claim?" I nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. The man who purchased my tools is here to testify." Felix was called to the witness stand. He was sworn in and took his seat, looking directly at the judge. My ex-wife's lawyer shifted in his chair nervously. "Please state your name for the record," the judge said. "Felix Cordero." "And how are you involved in this case?" Felix pulled out the receipts and his phone. 6 weeks ago, I purchased tools from Mrs. Mitchell through Casey's Pawn and Resale. She told me her husband had died and she was clearing out his workshop. The courtroom got very quiet. You could hear people breathing. She told you her husband was deceased? The judge asked, looking over at my ex-wife, who was staring at the table. Yes, sir. Multiple times. I have text messages where she refers to him as her late husband and talks about selling items from his estate. Felix handed the phone to the bailiff, who brought it to the judge. The judge read through the messages, his expression getting harder with each one. The whole courtroom shifted. My ex-wife's lawyer squirmed in his seat and whispered something to her. She shook her head sharply. Did you sell his property? The judge asked her directly. My ex-wife's denial came too fast, too loud. No, yes, I sold some old tools, but they weren't being used. He'd abandoned his business. I had every right to clear out the garage. Her voice was getting higher, more desperate. Those tools were junk. They were professional Milwaukee, DeWalt, and Makita equipment, Felix interrupted calmly. Worth several $1,000s new. I paid $800 for all of it. That's robbery, not clearing out junk. The judge held up his hand for silence. Mrs. Mitchell, did you or did you not tell this man that your husband was deceased? She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Her face was bright red now, almost purple. Her lawyer put a hand on her arm, probably telling her to stop talking. I may have said something like that, she finally admitted, her voice much quieter. But it was just a figure of speech. Our marriage was dead. The judge's expression showed exactly what he thought of that excuse. I'm going to need to see financial records, he said. I want bank statements and transaction histories for both of you. Now. The bailiff brought over laptops and pulled up the requested financial information. My stomach clenched as I watched the judge review the statements. This was it, the moment of truth. The judge's eyes moved across the screen, then stopped. He leaned closer, studying something. Mrs. Mitchell, he said slowly, you have a deposit here for $850 on the same date as Mr. Cordero's pawn shop receipt. She froze. I don't know what that is, she said, but her voice wavered. It could be from anything. The amount matches almost exactly, the judge continued, and there's a notation in the transaction record. It says Casey's Pawn. Her face went white. She'd forgotten to cover her tracks. In all her scheming and planning, she'd deposited the money directly into her account and labeled it. The judge turned to her lawyer. Counselor, does your client have an explanation for this? Her lawyer looked at the screen, then at my ex-wife, then back at the judge. May I have a moment to consult with my client, Your Honor? What else are you hiding? The judge asked my ex-wife directly. That question opened a door nobody expected. The judge ordered a full review of both our financial accounts. What they found shocked even me. My ex-wife had a secondary checking account I didn't know about. She'd opened it 8 months ago, right around when she started planning the divorce. The account was full of suspicious transactions, luxury purchases from high-end stores, spa treatments and salon visits, hotel charges from a resort in the mountains where she'd apparently spent 3 weekends while telling me she was visiting her sister. The amounts were significant. Thousands of dollars that should have been in our joint savings. Where did this money come from? The judge asked, his patience clearly wearing thin. She stammered through an explanation about gifts from her mother and selling old jewelry. But the timeline didn't match. The deposit started before she sold my tools. This was bigger than I thought. Your Honor, her lawyer said, standing up, I request a brief recess to review these findings with my client. The judge checked his watch. Fine, we'll reconvene in 30 minutes, and Mrs. Mitchell, I'm ordering a full financial audit. Everything. During the recess, I sat in the hallway watching my ex-wife panic. She was on her phone, making frantic calls. Her voice carried through the corridor as she argued with someone. Her lawyer looked defeated, sitting on a bench with his head in his hands. When we returned to the courtroom, the audit results were already coming in. The forensic accountant the court had called in worked fast. More inconsistencies appeared in her financial records. She'd forged dates on several documents, trying to make it look like certain purchases happened before our separation. She'd moved money between accounts to hide spending. She'd lied on financial disclosure forms, claiming we had fewer assets than we actually did. Every lie led to another lie, and the whole structure was collapsing. Her lawyer kept asking for more time, more recesses, more opportunities to explain, but there was no explaining away hard evidence. The judge's face grew sterner with each new revelation. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said finally, "you've committed fraud on this court. You've destroyed marital property, lied under oath, and attempted to manipulate these proceedings." She started crying, but they were angry tears, not remorseful ones. The judge called for another recess, but this one had a different feeling. My ex-wife stormed out of the courtroom, her lawyer trailing behind, trying to calm her down. I stayed in my seat, not trusting myself to be near her. Felix gave me a supportive nod from the gallery before stepping out. 10 minutes later, raised voices echoed from the hallway. I couldn't make out words, but I recognized my ex-wife's voice. She was screaming at someone. The bailiff, who'd been standing by the door, suddenly straightened up and walked quickly into the hallway. Through the open door, I heard my ex-wife shouting clearly now. "He deserved it. He was always working, always putting those stupid tools before me. I hoped he'd lose everything. I wanted him to know what it felt like to have nothing." The courtroom clerk looked at me with wide eyes. Other people in the gallery murmured to each other. The bailiff's voice came through, trying to calm her down, but she wouldn't stop. "I don't care anymore. I'm tired of pretending. Yes, I sold his tools. Yes, I lied, and I'd do it again." When we returned to the courtroom, the atmosphere had completely changed. The bailiff reported my ex-wife's hallway meltdown directly to the judge. Her lawyer looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. She sat at her table with her arms crossed, her face still flushed with anger, but her mouth finally closed. The judge stared at her for a long moment. "Mrs. Mitchell, I've been practicing law for 30 years. I've seen a lot of difficult divorces, but I have rarely seen someone so deliberately sabotage their spouse's livelihood." He shuffled papers on his desk. "You sold your husband's professional equipment for personal gain. You lied to the buyer about your husband being deceased. You hid money in secret accounts. You committed perjury in this courtroom. And moments ago, you admitted in front of witnesses that you hoped your husband would lose everything." She didn't respond, just stared at the table in front of her. "This is what we call marital waste and deliberate sabotage," the judge continued, "and it has serious consequences." He looked down at his notes, then back up at both of us. "I'm ready to announce my ruling." The judge's ruling was thorough and devastating to my ex-wife's case. First, he ordered her to pay me full compensation for the value of my stolen tools. Not what she sold them for at the pawn shop, but their actual replacement value, several $1,000s. Second, he awarded me business restitution for the income I'd lost while trying to work with inadequate equipment. He calculated this based on my previous year's earnings and the contracts I could prove I'd lost. Third, he gave me full right to recover my actual tools from Felix, who would be compensated fairly for his purchase price from my ex-wife's share of marital assets. The house, which she'd claimed she deserved, would be sold and the proceeds split evenly, but her half would go toward paying the compensation she owed me first. Her secret bank account was frozen and would be used to settle her debts. Every scheme she'd constructed fell apart. Everything she'd tried to take from me through lies and manipulation was stripped away. She lost the house claim, the financial claim, everything. Her lawyer made one last weak attempt to argue for leniency, but the judge shut it down. "Your client brought this on herself," he said flatly. As I stood to leave, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: hope. 2 months later, I stood in front of my workshop with a new set of keys. I'd found a better space, bigger and better located than the garage I'd been using before. The compensation from the divorce settlement had allowed me to upgrade everything. Inside, my recovered tools sat on new shelves, alongside equipment I'd purchased to replace what couldn't be recovered. Felix had helped me rebuild my inventory, refusing to make any profit on the tools he returned. We'd become friends through this whole ordeal. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from old clients who'd heard I was back in business. Word spread quickly in the construction community. People respected that I'd fought back and won. My first week back, I booked more jobs than I could handle alone. I had to hire an assistant. The business wasn't just surviving anymore. It was thriving. I never contacted my ex-wife after court, never gloated or sent spiteful messages. I simply moved forward, focusing on rebuilding what she'd tried to destroy. This wasn't revenge. It was justice earned through patience, documentation, and choosing truth over her lies. I unlocked my workshop door and stepped inside, breathing in the smell of sawdust and oil. I didn't just get my tools back, I got my life back. And this time I'd built it on a foundation she could never touch.